Greetings, colleagues. How is a formal meeting supposed to be managed? Have you ever ran a meeting? Or do you want to understand how a meeting is run? What is the best way to keep a meeting on track? If you're struggling to understand the procedures of the meeting, or want to improve your business English, or just want to be ready for your next round of meetings, then this is the video for you. We'll go through some common terms used in meetings and give some useful examples. Let's level up your business English. Welcome to the 4 Business English Rundown. I'm your host, Timothy Barrett. This is a show for people all over the world who want to improve their professional communication skills in English. Today we're going to talk about useful phrases for running a meeting. So even if you're not running the meeting yourself, you want to understand what's going on in the meeting. Why are the people using these phrases, or why is the chair asking these questions, that sort of thing. So I'll go through a lot of the procedures that a formal meeting might include. Now, there's a big difference between very formal meetings or maybe very informal meetings. Generally speaking, the more people attending, probably the more formal the meeting is going to be. Otherwise, it just gets unwieldy, it gets chaotic. You need some more order. But also the magnitude of the meeting. If this is an important, multi-million-dollar company that's having a board meeting, it's probably going to be more formal than if it's just a startup company that hasn't even made any money yet and is having its first board meeting. So the more that's on the line, or maybe either of those boards is making a very important decision at this meeting. So they're going to be even more formal than they normally are. Or maybe there's nothing going on in this meeting. They're meeting, but there's no major decisions to be made. There's nothing controversial or confrontational, so maybe they're going to be less formal because of that. It's an easier meeting to run. So the first thing to notice about a meeting is, what is the level of formality? And that level should be fairly consistent, every time it meets, but there may be exceptions. Like I said, it may be more formal sometimes when there's an important decision, or less formal when there's not many decisions to be made. The start of the meeting. So at the very start of the meeting, it's very common that people might be doing small talk. People are sitting down, they're getting their seats, they're talking to each other, and they're waiting for the others to arrive or waiting for the meeting to formally begin. And then once it's time, then the chair might say something like, we have a lot to get through today, so let's get started. Or we have to be out of here by 12, so let's get started. I have another meeting, or Bob has another meeting he has to run to, so let's get started. Or let's get down to business. I think we should start. I think everybody is here, so let's get started. And all of these phrases are just kind of a polite way of saying, like, okay, let's start the meeting. The small talk is over. Let's begin the formal part of the meeting. One of the first things that might happen in the meeting is welcoming the people that are there. The chair might say, thank you all for coming. I appreciate everyone being here. I appreciate you coming on short notice. First, I'd like to welcome you all. I'd like to thank you for being here on time. I wish to thank you all for coming on such short notice. Thanks for coming all the way here. Thanks for coming so far, so early, on a cold day, on a rainy day, something like that. And so that's kind of a polite way to get started.
Introductions all around. This is my XO, Lieutenant Stark.
Introductions. It's also common that the chair might introduce people at the meeting, new people at the meeting, or ask them to introduce themselves. If it's the same people that are meeting every week, then you're probably going to skip this. But if there's someone new to the meeting, or maybe every week there's some new people to the meeting, then you're probably going to start with introductions. People want to know who the other people in the room are, especially if it's a small meeting. So the chair might say, could everyone briefly introduce themselves? They could go around the horn and everyone gives a brief introduction. In that situation, it's often helpful for the chair to start. I'll start by introducing myself, and then the chair gets to kind of set the tone. Is he looking or she looking for a 10-second introduction? Oh, just give me your name and your title. Or are they looking for a 30 or 60-second biography or a 2-minute biography, telling about your background, how did you end up here, that sort of thing. So the chair, by going first, can kind of set that tone and everyone else can kind of follow. Otherwise, whoever goes first will have to kind of decide how much information they want to give. And often, psychologically, everyone will just kind of follow that. If the first person gives a short bio, everyone is going to follow that. If they give a longer bio, then they're probably going to give that. You want to give the example of what you expect from the introduction. Or the chair might introduce the new people. If there's just one or two or three new people, the chair could say something like, I would like to introduce Nancy. This is her first meeting. She just joined the accounting team, something like that. Or I would like to begin by introducing. It's my pleasure to introduce. Let's take a moment to introduce, or let's take a moment to introduce ourselves. Please join me in welcoming. Introducing the agenda or the meeting goals. So generally, after the introductions are done, the chair will then kind of introduce what is the agenda, what are the main points for the meeting, or what are the goals for the meeting. What do we want to decide or accomplish by the end of the meeting today? The chair could say something like, our aim today is to, we are here to decide or agree on. By the end of the meeting, we need to, I've scheduled the meeting so that the purpose of today's meeting is, today we're going to, as you all probably might possibly know, as you all should know, as you all might know, as you all probably know, as I wrote in my email yesterday about this meeting, or as I wrote in my email, or as I wrote yesterday about the meeting, as I wrote in the email sending the agenda, the main reason for the meeting is, what we need to decide today is, or what we need to discuss today is, the main topic, subject, aim, or goal, purpose of this meeting is, introducing the agenda or roadmap for the meeting. First, we will be discussing. After that, we will move on to. Then we'll try to cover. Shortly after, we'll go over. Next, we will consider. If there's enough time, then we will go through. Finally, we will talk about. Phrases for sharing an update at the meeting. So it's very common at the meeting, especially maybe towards the beginning of the meeting, sometimes it's at the end, but for either everybody or some people to give updates on certain projects. We could use phrases like that. For that, we could use phrases such as, I would like to inform everyone about the project's progress. How is the project coming along? Has everyone submitted their monthly reports? Jane, can you let us know what's new regarding last month's reports? I would like to add, I suggest we start with Mary updating us on changing topics. So when it's time to change topics, the chair might say something like, okay, we've still got a few points to get through, so let's move to the next topic. Right, I think we've covered that, so let's move on to the next point, the next topic on the agenda, shall we? Let's turn our attention to, or we don't seem to be making much progress on this, so let's continue this discussion by email. Maybe we can come back to that later or at a later date if we have time. Maybe we can come back to that later if we have time, or maybe we can come back to that at the next meeting. Maybe we should sleep on this and try again next week. So if we're not making any progress now, and maybe it's kind of futile, there's no point in continuing to discuss it today, or maybe we're just running out of time, and we're not making progress on this. We have other things that we need to get to. So let's stop working on this and get to something else. If nobody has anything else to share, let's move on. I think that covers it. Now let's go on to our next topic. Let's move on to our next point. Since we've covered this issue, I think we can go on to the next one. The next topic we need to cover is, now that we've found a solution, or now that we've discussed a solution, we can go on to keeping the discussion on track. So sometimes, depending on the people involved, it can be difficult to keep the focus on the topic at hand. Maybe people start going off in different directions. They want to talk about other things or bring up other issues. Sometimes the chair of the meeting has to make sure everyone stays on the topic, or kind of move on if we're not making any progress on this topic. Can we continue this discussion later on and get back to the main point? We're getting off the topic. Can we go back to our subject, please? Can we go back to thinking about, I'm afraid we're running out of time. Can we go back to the question? Getting back to the topic. Let's skip this topic and bring it up another time. We can continue talking about this topic later, but for now, let's go back to, I'm afraid that's outside the scope of our meeting. Let's talk about that when the meeting is over. Why don't we return to the main agenda item for today's meeting? We've gone slightly off topic. Let's go back to the meeting agenda item. Asking for input. Asking someone to speak. So sometimes the chair will want specific input from people on maybe on a specific topics, or maybe one person looks like they're not contributing. They want to get that person to contribute, to participate in the meeting. Or maybe the chair sees that one person is trying to talk but keeps getting interrupted, so the chair might help that person out by saying something like this. Now, John, tell us more about... I'll hand it over to Margaret, who can share more about this topic. Frank is now going to take over and tell us about... I'll hand it over to Beth, who will tell us about... Now I'd like to introduce Sally, who will talk about... Do you have, or does anyone have, any other thoughts, any other comments, any other input, any other views on this topic before we move on? Or what do you think about this? What do you think about that? How does that sound to you? Summarizing the meeting. So at the end of the meeting, or maybe at the end of an agenda item, it could be very useful to kind of summarize what was decided, what was discussed, what points we agreed on, and maybe what points we disagreed on. So that way everyone is on the same page. We all agree that we all understand and agree that's what everyone thought at today's meeting. Especially when a lot of things are covered, or if there's controversial things that are covered, it's very useful to kind of summarize at the time. Then if there is disagreement, we can deal with that at the time, not at the next meeting a month later or something like that, where memories might be faded a little bit. So here are some phrases that might help with that. Here are some of the main points we discussed today. To sum up, we've talked about, or we've decided that. I'd like to briefly cover or summarize the topics we talked about today. Before we finish, let's go over the topics we discussed today, or let's go over the decisions we made today. Let's quickly summarize the main points of the meeting. To summarize then, let's go through what we discussed today, or what we've agreed to today. Before we go, let me summarize 3 main points. To sum up what I've presented, or to sum up what Frank has presented, or to sum up what we've all discussed,
I'd like to thank everyone for making the effort to convene us again today after our first meeting.
phrases for showing appreciation. I'd like to thank everyone for coming today. Thank you all for your time. Thank you all for your participation in today's meeting. I want to thank everyone for a productive meeting. I'd like to thank everyone for sharing your time today. I look forward to seeing you all again soon. See you at the next meeting. See you next week. See you soon. See you then. See you later. Ending a meeting. To end the meeting, the chair might use one of these phrases. To conclude, we've decided to. That just about covers everything for today. We have covered everything from our agenda. We'll have to finish here. But our next meeting will be scheduled for next week, next month, tomorrow, whatever it is. If there's nothing more to discuss, then we'll end here. Any final thoughts before we end the meeting? If you have any further questions or you want to discuss this further, we can meet privately. I'd like to thank everyone for participating today. If you have anything further, then please email me. So do we think this is the best way to proceed? Are there any objections to what I covered? Is there anything else that we need to discuss before we finish? Don't stop your learning now. Check out this video about useful terms for meetings in business English. Hopefully these phrases were useful to you and you better understand some of the common phrases that you might hear in a business meeting. If it was, then conquer that like button and make it ours.